The king is dead. Long live the king. Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today we have a side-by-side comparison of the 2021 Rolex Oyster Perpetual Air-King and the new for 22 Rolex Oyster Perpetual Air-King. It's 116900 versus 126900. This is not a formal versus. This is more of a comparison to chart the changes and describe and depict just how different the new Air-King really is. Because I think a lot of folks online have fallen into the trap of thinking that this watch is just a new movement and a set of crown guards. The difference is far more dramatic. I would say there are more changes to the Air-King this year than there were to the Explorer 2 relative to the previous model in 2021. The watch is still 40 millimeters in diameter, as it has been since Basel World 2016, but everything else is different. The thickness of the case is 11.6. It is 47.4 millimeters from lug to lug, and if you include the end links, the total distance across the wrist is 51.2 millimeters. It is a 21 millimeter spacing between the lugs. Now let's compare it to the old watch, which is also 40 millimeters in diameter, but it's 13.3 millimeters thick. It's a lot thicker. From lug to lug, the distance is 49 millimeters, and then the end links are almost flush to the end of the lugs because the link-to-link distance across the wrist on the old model is 49.7. So the dramatic change in thickness is evident when I hold the watches crystal to crystal. Now you can really see the difference. A couple of differences, in fact. You can see the thickness of the case. You can also see the difference in the size of the crystals, as the crystal on the newer watch is much broader, commensurate to the size of the dial, which is expanded. The old watch with a soft iron inner cage is a much thicker timepiece that is internally identical to the Milgauss. Now, taking a quick look at the new watch, we'll throw it on my wrist and get a sense of how it fits. It fits a lot like the new OP41 in that it is quite flat, very thin and broad across the wrist. My wrist is 16 centimeters circumference, and I recommend that your wrist be at least 15 centimeters circumference to wear this watch well. It is quite broad thanks to the expanded link-to-link total distance across the wrist. That said, it is much easier to fit underneath a cuff. Now, I'll give you a quick look at the old watch on my wrist, and you can immediately see that although it's not quite as broad across the wrist, it is much more massive and much thicker. From every angle, it's a bulkier timepiece. That is the older model right there. Taking a quick look at the end links of the bracelet, we're going to do an end-on-end look at the new watch and the old. You can really see that the end link of the old bracelet is 20 millimeters, and on the new one, it is 21 millimeters. And the key difference here is that Rolex took out 0.5 millimeter of the inner face of each lug. Thinning out the lugs, it then expanded the end link for a better match between end link width and the width of the case. It also creates a thinner, finer profile for the lugs. Now, that continues all the way down the bracelet, every link of the bracelet and the width of the clasp greater than the corresponding part on the original Air-King. Big changes externally. You can see that the new watch features an applique pinned Rolex coronet crown, and then a combination of a clamshell and a spring-loaded lift lock system with a beak and a hook. The old watch featured a stamped Rolex crown, and then it featured only the lift lock system with the beak and a hook. So this is a really big change from a qualitative standpoint. Some folks are mistakenly claiming that the old model did not feature Easy Link. The old model, which I have right here, does in fact feature Easy Link. It is just not as securely locked in place when closed on the wrist. So you can see the new one also has Easy Link. This is common to both models. It's the quality of the clasp and the locking security that improves on the new one. And again, you really can see that the width of the clasps is different. The new one is a little bit wider than the old one. Taking a look at the case flank, dramatic changes. You can see the case is now a little bit more like a sub, a Sea Dweller, or a GMT. It's not quite the super case, but it's getting there with a sheer side, a sharp break between case band and then the lug hood, and the lugs are now thinner. Taking a quick look at the old watch here, let's take a look at that case band real quick and take a look at the old watch. You can see it has a voluminous shape, a little bit bloated to accommodate that soft iron inner anti-magnetic cage. You can see that there's less of a distinct break between the case flank flank and the lug hoods, and you can see this watch is still in its original shipping sticker, so it hasn't been refinished. There's no loss of definition between the case flank and the lug hood. It's just that it isn't as well defined compared to the new watch, and you can really see the difference between the case band here and the lug profile and the case band here and the lug profile. They are nothing like each other. Taking a quick look at the bezel, it's smaller on the new watch. It's been thinned out. The sapphire is expanded. The dial has now been expanded by 0.8 millimeter, and that's not the easiest thing to see, but as we noted when the watches were crystal to crystal, the new crystal is quite a bit broader and flatter than the old one. And you can also see how the new bezel is quite a bit broader compared to the somewhat constrained previous bezel, which extended further over the dial. The dial has changed, and it's not just the presence of the little Rolex crown between Swiss and made. It's also the fact that the new dial features fully loomed tri-Arabic numerals, so 9, 6, and 3 are now luminescent compared to solid gold on the older watch. You can also see some changes that have been made for the sake of balance. Numeral 5 up at 1 o'clock has now become numeral 05 to better counterbalance the 55. The font has changed, and I'll let you see them side by side because this is probably the most subtle change. It's not readily apparent, but if you look long enough, you will see that changes have been made. Taking a quick look at the hands, you could see that the hands have been altered, most notably the Mercedes-style hour hand. Take a look at the little triangular index on the outside. Take a look at the length of the shaft between the cannon pinion and the little roundel. Now take a look at the new watch. You can see that the shaft between cannon pinion and roundel is thinner and longer. You can also see that the little luminescent index, the point or the triangle, is longer and pointier on the new watch versus shorter and stubbier on the old watch. Those are some major changes. We'll also do a comparative Loom Shot so you can appreciate how much the watch has been altered. The old watch, well, it's legible, but not supremely, whereas with the new watch, you have a much better sense of where the quarters are for reading the time. They both use Rolex Chromolite Loom. The new one just has more of it. Both watches remain 904L steel. Both watches are entirely manufactured from the inside out. 904L steel, of course, more resistant to corrosion in the presence of salt and acid than standard 316. It is a high nickel content steel that Rolex makes at its own foundry. Now, there are changes here, and you can see that the crown guard profile is probably the most obvious. That is missing on the previous watch, which has the same case and internal structure as the Rolex Milgauss. Both of them are 100 meters water resistant. Both of them have solid case backs. Not a whole lot changes back there. It's just this watch feels like it has an additional case back worth of thickness. Screw down crowns, again, 100 meters water resistant. There are some movement changes. And one change that's easy to miss is how the movements adjust. Now, I should give you a quick primer on these dials, where they come from. The tri-Arabic numerals are sometimes known as Explorer dial, but the actual design with the numerals, the calibrations, the combination of black, white, yellow, and green, that comes from the design of the Bloodhound supersonic car project. The car never really lived up to its billing. It didn't quite make it across the supersonic threshold. It was a stillborn engineering project, but Rolex designed the instruments for the dashboard of the supersonic car to be, and the design of those instruments informs the design of the Air-King dial and has since 2016. So here's a funny thing about the new watch compared to the old, and it's something you could easily miss. Most comparisons online don't talk about changes in generation. Take a look at how the previous generation watch adjusts as I turn the crown in a clockwise direction. Turning clockwise, moving clockwise. Okay, now this is the new 3230. This is the 3131. This is the 3230. As I turn clockwise, the hands move counterclockwise. That's a funny distinction between the two of them, and it highlights the fact that the new watch has an all-new movement. Rolex caliber 3230 now has a 70-hour power reserve versus 48. Both of them feature stop seconds 31 joules. Both of them beat at 8 beats per second. Both of them have movements that are certified as Swiss chronometers. Both of them have been cased up, assembled, and regulated in 6 positions to keep time no worse than +2, -2 seconds per 24 hours. That is what superlative chronometer means on these dials. Rolex has used the phrase for a long time, but in the last few years it has a substantive meaning, and that meaning is the fully assembled watch +2, -2 seconds per 24 hours. Now, of course, we also have a number of subsidiary features, both watches with a full balance bridge and a free-sprung balance for shock tolerance. But in addition to the longer 70-hour power reserve, the new watch has a rotor, a winding rotor that sits on a ball bearing for better shock resistance and support, whereas the older movement uses a jeweled staff, which is very smooth but not as shock tolerant. Both watches use handmade Breguet overcoil hairsprings to ace their chronometer tests and keep excellent time in any physical position. And I should also mention that the niobium zirconium alloy used for this hairspring means this generation of the Air-King, like the previous generation, is a lot more anti-magnetic than Milgauss. With the soft iron inner cage, you get a certain amount of magnetic resistance, but most of the anti-magnetic qualities of the old movement are due to its nickel phosphorus escapement and its niobium zirconium hairspring, and you have those exact same features in the new watch. So, technically speaking, we have a sea change in the Air. This Air and auto-inspired watch has taken a huge step forward in dial design, case design, bracelet design, and movement specification. These are effectively very different watches, and the new one is all new, truly, not a refinement of the old. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details of either one of these Air-Kings.